Welcome to Blaze News, The Mandate, Day 24. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, a federal judge appointed by Joe Biden blocked DOJ from accessing Education Department records. The 2-week temporary restraining order applies to personal sensitive information, including financial data related to federal student loans. The judge, who's Deborah Borman, is the same judge that blocked President Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. Last night, President Trump announced that FBI Director Kash Patel has picked former U.S. Secret Service agent and conservative commentator Dan Bongino to be his FBI deputy director. Now, of course, this move sparked outrage on the left. Democrat Senator Chris Murphy wrote on X that Trump chose grifters to lead the FBI, and Adam Cohen, who's the vice chair of the anti-Trump group Lawyers for Good Government, claimed that Bongino is an unqualified conspiracy theorist. And this morning, President Trump met with French President Macron at the White House to discuss the end of the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as the appropriate return on investment for the United States.
It looks like we're getting very close. The deal's being worked on, and we're, I think, getting very close to getting an agreement where we get our money back over a period of time. But it also gives us something where I think it's very beneficial to their economy, to them as a country. But, you know, we're in for $350 billion. How we got there, I don't know. But that's a lot of money, a lot of money invested. And we had nothing to show for it. And it was the Biden administration's fault.
Well, today is the third anniversary of the war in Ukraine, and 2 UN resolutions were up for vote regarding the conflict. The United States pushed its own resolution and encouraged member states to reject Ukraine's. The U.S. solution does not emphasize Kiev's territorial integrity and demands a swift end to the war. Ukraine's resolution, on the other hand, blames Russia for the war and demands the removal of Russian troops from its territory. The White House released an article detailing some of its latest wins this morning. Apple CEO Tim Cook announced that his company will invest $500 billion in the United States over the next 4 years as a result of meeting with President Trump in the White House and Trump's tariffs push. Now, this is expected to bring 20,000 new U.S.-based jobs and revive American manufacturing. In border security news, people who have illegally crossed the border have reportedly given up and are returning to their own countries over Trump's new policies that crack down on illegal crossings. And finally, U.S. District Judge Carl Nichols declined to extend a temporary stay that prevented USAID from placing thousands of its workers on leave. As a result, all USAID workers deemed non-essential, which is about 4,000 people, were placed on administrative leave last night. A ruling in a separate lawsuit, however, is still preventing the Trump administration from pausing foreign aid, grants, and contracts that were previously approved by Congress. With so much going on, let's bring in Blaze News editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson. So, Matthew, when we look at it right now, we have an FBI that is run now by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, right? Like, how did we get here? This is real life. What do we expect to see from here?
It is real life, and fan favorites are becoming actual leaders again in government. So I think one of the biggest things about this hire is that Bongino and Kash Patel both were from the beginning on the first scandal, the first controversy, the first false narrative that was really thrown at Trump as, you know, even before he entered office. So as Hillary Clinton, as Barack Obama left public life, they spun up the Russian collusion case against Trump, which turned out to be, of course, completely fallacious. But that was the beginning of business not as usual, of going to the next level of corruption in order to oppose Trump. And I think that people like Bongino and Kash, what's most exciting to me is from the beginning, they were on that. I mean, they've been calling that out for a while. They know where bodies are buried. And I believe that it's really important that we get justice for the original sin, really, of the media against Donald Trump.
And we see a shift where tech CEOs and other business owners are trying to work with Donald Trump. Chris Bedford wrote about this probably a month or a month and a half ago, just saying, you can tell that there's something different going on right now. Well, now you get Tim Cook and Apple that are saying, okay, we're going to put $500 billion back in the United States. Yep. That's not something that we had seen in quite some time. And just the willingness to go through and say, okay, we're going to invest in America and make sure that things are good here at home first is good to see.
Yeah, so the few things on that. One is, remember that tech is the cutting edge for basically all commerce in America. And this is the actual top thing that we do financially in terms of business in the country. It's the most powerful sector in many ways, and that's why it's sort of the sexiest. But notice this about tech. In tech, what happened is, way before this happened with Cook, it's unimaginable, right? Apple, all of a sudden, all these guys coming around to Trump. Way before that, over the last few years, there are many people in technology who were quietly on the team, who quietly were much more conservative or just dissident against the Borg, against regulation. They chafed against a lot of the wokeness. And some of those people, Peter Thiel is probably a prominent public example of someone who went public for Trump back in 2016. Some of these people were always dissenting, right? And that grew, and there was a lot of work behind the scenes. I know I was there for some of it. I mean, that group grew and grew and grew, and they got more and more belligerent. They got more and more public. And finally, you have Elon coming out, et cetera. So that pushed everybody, right? And what did that do? That made it so people like Bezos or Cook, right? It made it a lot easier for them because in their hearts, they know. And they also know in their hearts, if they're just Machiavellian businessmen, they know who the winner is and who they have to appease. So what you've seen is a slow progression and then all of a sudden, turnover where now you have guys like Tim Cook coming out for Donald Trump.
Well, it is the 3-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. When we were in Washington, D.C. Over the weekend, we saw some of the people that were sympathetic, let's say, for the Ukrainians, and they had their Ukraine flags that were tied around them right there on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. It was heartwarming to see, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I was my
was
open
so
mind
strange.
was changed. It was really profound. I mean, I started to sing the Ukrainian anthem. It was actually pretty small. It was pretty interesting. I don't know how many Feds were in the crowd, but it wasn't hugely impressive. But there were people there who were passionate about continuing the war to defend Ukraine, I guess.
Right, of course. They have to protect Ukraine and all of the things that they started a war for 3 years ago, which still to this day, nobody really knows the exact reasons, except for to give Zelensky billions and billions more dollars.
Yeah, I mean, Russia is to blame in many ways here, but this is something where we feasted upon money laundering in Ukraine and we pushed them into this, and it was interesting. I mean, this was a small rally, I would say, right? That was by the Lincoln Memorial, and they were walking down the mall and playing music. A few hundred people, I'd say.
Yeah.
And it felt like sort of the energy of the entire country there. And some of the other rallies I've seen that were similar, I think people are just kind of done.
Yeah, it did not feel energetic. It was not like a Donald Trump mega rally. Let's just put it that way. That it was not all the peace and love of a mega rally.
No, I mean, it was just sort of quiet and sad.
Quiet and sad. That's what we hope to see for some of those. But you know what? It's still going on right now. So we'll see if Donald Trump can actually take care of business. But don't go anywhere because our next guest will explain how the CIA is helping out at the southern border. Stay with us. We have big pieces shifting every day. So how has the CIA shifted its focus under the second Trump administration? Todd Bensman is a senior fellow for the Center for Immigration Studies, and he recently told Steve Bannon that the agency has realigned its focus from Ukraine to the Mexican cartels. Watch.
Where they're going to really be enhancing and increasing their ability to infiltrate the cartels, to provide intelligence against the cartels in a more dedicated, committed fashion, a wider, broader way to do counter narcotics.
So we need more information on that. So Todd is joining us now to break it all down. So what's going on right now with the CIA at the southern border?
Right. The CIA is being repositioned right now as we speak from European and Middle East theaters to the theater of Mexico for counter-narcotics operations. And I think that it's important to understand the broader context of this, which is that Donald Trump campaigned, and since he's been elected, has said many, many times that we are going to stop the fentanyl smuggling from the cartels into the United States that's killing all our people. Hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of overdoses inside the United States from that. The administration seems to be setting the table right now for something. Not sure what it's going to be just yet, but in addition to the CIA repositioning, the administration is also doing a tremendous number of additional spy flights over Mexican waters and near Mexican territory, and sometimes even in Mexican airspace. And on top of that, the Green Berets have been sent down there to train Mexican naval infantry forces in non-conventional warfare, which is something new and different as well. So there seems to be naval assets that are being moved up the Gulf of America, and something's going on. 10,000 Mexican troops now positioned up there. We'll see.
So this is, I mean, this is an enormous difference from what we've seen over the last, the 4 years of Joe Biden. I mean, it's sudden, it's remarkable. What do you think happens next, though? Because the cartels are going to respond, no? I mean, this should usher in a new era where really you have a kind of narco state for a while now in Mexico, patchwork quilt of, normalized corruption. And is this the beginning of actually unraveling all of that?
Well, this is pure speculation, but I don't mind if I do. Remember, the administration is saying things that the terminology, the verbiage that they're using are things like, we are going to completely wipe out the cartels, things like that. Now, that could just be hyperbole, but I do think that a probable kind of operation that they're setting the table up for now is to have Mexico throw out its hugs not bullets, I'm not kidding, hugs not bullets policy toward the cartels, and trade it in for a bullets not hugs policy, or else they'll be looking at 25% trade tariffs, which Donald Trump has already put in place and has his finger hovering over that button if he doesn't get some scalps pretty soon. That's what I think is going to happen. I think the Mexicans are going to use American intel, American training, maybe American weapons to do things against the fentanyl labs and the mobile fentanyl labs, the smuggling lanes, to try to convince those cartels to give up the fentanyl part of it, at least. So we'll see what happens. We've been involved in things like this with Mexico in the past. It hasn't worked out all that great. From 2006 to 2012, the Calderon government, with us behind them like this, went full military kinetic on the cartels, and it didn't work out. But we also did it with FARC down in Colombia, and that one did work out. So we'll see.
So you're saying we should fire up the Sicario movies to prepare for action as in the audience. We'll see what happens. I mean, I don't see any way to succeed without going all the way, and that goes to the heart of really the problem of the regime in Mexico. So that will be very interesting. But let's put that aside for a minute and zoom out a little bit, just in general. When you look, most people looking at the border now, right? It seems like, well, everything's fine. I mean, right? It's a trickle. How do you sort of assess the big picture right now when it comes to the border?
Well, the greatest mass migration crisis event in American history, and I think maybe a world history, is over. It was over 1 hour after inauguration. There are somewhere around the 200, 250, under 300 illegal crossings a day now, which we haven't seen since the early 60s. That's how low the numbers are, and I would call that operational control. And that's because the very first thing the administration did was he ended catch and release. Nobody's getting released into the interior, as opposed to everyone being released who got there under the Biden administration. Of course, there were millions that came. So all he ever had to do, all anybody ever had to do was just stop releasing them and expel them instead. That's what Trump did, and it ended it immediately. Did not need a big Lankford bill, a big Senate bill like Harris kept talking about all through the campaign. Didn't need to fix root causes in Central American countries. Today, there's reporting out that thousands of Venezuelans and others are now flowing backwards through the Darien Gap the way they came in. Thousands taking speedboats off the coast of Panama back to Colombia, returning home. Thousands. So that tells you that this thing is probably going to stick.
Well, I want to get your take on border czar Tom Homan, because we love watching him, right? All the headlines that he makes, all the sound bites that he has on the news shows. But it's not just that, right? He's actually getting the job done. But this is your wheelhouse. So I want to know what you think of the job that Tom Homan has done and kind of the things that you've noticed that other people might not have recognized yet.
Yeah. Well, first of all, colorful figure. You got to appreciate that. Tom Homan talks, and he talks the talk, but he is walking the walk. He wants those numbers up. He's pushing nonstop to get the deportation numbers from the interior up. And they are up greater than any rate that Joe Biden ever had, because Biden all but ended interior deportations. And by the way, as an aside, don't believe the press coverage about, Homan's deportations are lower than Biden's, because Biden people are counting some of the Title 42 pandemic era border expulsions that were going on right at the immediate border, not the interior, which is what Homan's doing. So I think that, he wants higher numbers because, and I'm saying, manage your expectations down a little bit, because the Biden administration dismantled the detention centers. So they didn't have the bed space necessary to put people while we wait for the planes, or to, get a paddy wagon to drive them over the border and that sort of thing. And those beds are filling up now. Homan inherited 40,000 beds, and he needed 100,000. So they need $175 billion they're asking for in budget to build the infrastructure out to be able to actually bring the numbers up really high for the deportation. So just be patient a little bit.
Todd, our friend Brianna Morello, independent journalist, posted on X that the TSA under Joe Biden focused on speeding up checkpoints to process non-U.S. citizens at certain airports who do not have acceptable identification. So what Brianna is saying is that she got this information from a FOIA request, by the way, that documents that suddenly became acceptable forms of identification included warrant of arrest of alien, warrant of removal or deportation, and a notice to appear. So how was the previous administration able to repurpose those documents as IDs? And I hope to God this isn't going to continue.
No, that's over. All that crap's over. None of that stuff is happening anymore. They ended that day one, all of it done. What was going on there is the chief concern of Mayorkas and Biden, the only concern was a political one, which was they didn't want congestion that down on the border, people that were kind of stuck and waiting. So many were coming across. They didn't want big, large conglomerations and group congregations of people that Fox News could fly their drone over and embarrass them with. So they ordered TSA to just take whatever we give you and let them on the plane. It was a federal decision. Just let them on the plane so that we can move them out. We just got to move them out off the riverbanks so that nobody can fly over it with a news drone and say, wow, look how many there are. That's all that was. So that's over. None of that kind of thing is happening. The CBP-1, the parole programs where they were flying in from foreign airports, that all ended inauguration hour 12 plus 1 minute, literally 60 seconds. That was the first thing they did, was they killed those programs. And everybody, you saw the tears and crying down there, and now they're heading on speedboats out of Panama going back home to supposedly nations that they were fleeing that were so bad they had to declare political asylum and swear that they needed U.S. sanctuary from the persecution that they were getting in all these other countries they were living in, that they're going back to right now, which was all a lie, a total fraud.
Well, Todd Bensman, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And Matthew, when you look at it, the border obviously was one of the biggest, if not the absolute top of what Trump and his administration said they were going to do on day one. And like Todd's saying, exactly as soon as they got in there, things started happening immediately, and to the American people's pleasure, really. Like we finally get to see all of this stuff in action.
Yeah, so the first thing to notice about the border, which everyone is saying already, is that it shows you how purposeful this was. Very easy. Boom, done. Exactly. Todd's saying it, you're saying it, we're all seeing it, right? So we know that this was purposeful. This was a policy to let in millions of people. There's no doubt about it. But the deeper truth here is that where there's a will, there's a way. And it's over with now. I mean, you hear what he's saying. It's done. So now the greater question is, what are we going to do about Mexico itself and its dilapidated state? I mean, it is a narco state still. What are we going to see? What are we going to see happen? And then how are we going to ramp up deportation, right? That's the next level.
Yeah, the deportations. Tom Homan is going out there and, like Todd's saying, yes, everything. He wants to get those numbers up. He wants to work that. I will be curious, though, because I do feel like we have a window of time right now where the American people are still for it because they haven't had all of the news media outlets that are trying to push the sob stories that we've seen, right? AOC is no longer crying down there on the border. Maybe we'll see that in the next month or two. But we do have this short period of time right now where you can really enact the deportations. Yeah,
right now, the sob stories aren't working. And maybe they haven't cranked it up all the way. There's been some of that in the mainstream media for sure. But it's not working. And right now, I think the American people want this. Look, I've talked to many liberals about this, like people who are complete lefties or just moderate Democrats. And a lot of them will admit, when I say to them, because I pose the hypothetical, you could have won the presidency easy. You could have beat Donald Trump easy. All you had to do was run someone who said, the border's out of control and I'm a Democrat, I'm going to do something about it. Don't you think? Right? I pose that to them and they're all almost to a person. They go, yeah, that's kind of true. Like, why? You still don't have anyone who's speaking sensibly about the border. Right? So right now, I think there's a real chance for Donald Trump to actually mass deport.
And his approval numbers are actually going up right now, which is interesting to see that all of these things are happening and people are just liking him more as we go. Don't go anywhere. Chris Bedford will break down the key difference between Trump in his first term and his second, just ahead. During Donald Trump's first term, anti-Trump Republicans learned how to mask their Bush-era policies with pro-Trump language. But that isn't working this time around, as Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford explained in his Beltway brief. He joins us now to discuss this. So, Chris, let's start first by going through and let's explain the strategy that they used to use, right? The Republicans, they were over there trying to use these Bush-era policies. How did they do it back then?
They basically changed their tune, but didn't actually change any of the words to the script. You'd see this often, and Mitch McConnell was really a master of it. He would do exactly what Mitch McConnell wanted to do, whether that was on taxes or foreign policy or on judges. And he would mumble MAGA while doing it, and people were satisfied. They put out things like Cocaine Mitch and Red-Eyed Mitch and all this and that. Cocaine Mitch was a little bit older, I know, but that was how they decided to deal with it. And frequently, you would see Republicans doing this, and you kind of started to realize just how little they'd actually changed whenever the rubber met the road. For example, when Republicans were asked hard questions about COVID vaccination and corporate discrimination against Americans, Republicans were asked difficult questions about hospitals kicking people out because they hadn't taken some experimental vaccine. Republicans face difficult questions on Ukraine, as opposed to saying, "Well, what populist nationalists do, or what are my new ideas inform me?" They would mumble something about Ronald Reagan, basically always impugning his ghost, and say that it's not the government's job to actually get involved with protecting its people. Nothing really changed, but now he's back, and it's completely different.
Yeah, so let's what changed? I mean, why can't they get away with this anymore? Because this tactic worked for a long time, really. I mean, they stumbled along for years doing this, and it feels as if you're right. If you're just in the audience watching, for some reason, it doesn't work anymore. Why?
Broad backdrop to this whole thing, and please excuse me. I was at the dentist today, and I'm kind of stupid, and I didn't actually pay attention to what they were going to do, and it was really intense. So if half of my face isn't quite working, I was like, wait a second, you're doing what? And it involved a hammer and a chisel. So I may be a little slow in my talking today. But the overarching thing is that MAGA was no longer a couple of campaign slogans really pushed by one person that had electrified an American electorate. For now 8 years after that, people beyond simply you guys at Claremont and Michael Anton had been thinking about exactly what MAGA meant, what this populist nationalism meant. And at the same time, you had someone who was out of office who for 2 years we knew was going to be the Republican nominee. So people were working on files, on papers, on projects, on what a new administration might look like, knowing essentially who the candidate was, at least clear-minded people. There was a blip there where some people thought it could be Ron DeSantis, but everyone kind of understood that it was going to be Donald Trump if he wanted it, and they could work towards that. So that's the background. And then there's the middle ground, which is very solid personnel. They're not simply picking up from old Bushies who are just going to do what old Bushies did, which was the last Republican who'd been in power before Donald Trump came in there. They didn't have to harvest bones from AEI, essentially, and Cato Institute, and people who didn't really like them. There are now people who are extremely solid personnel mixed with veterans from the first administration, and jobs that I personally know were regional important jobs, were staffed by 20-something-year-old volunteers from the Chris Christie campaign, are now staffed by 40-something-year-old veterans of C-suites. That makes a real difference in your personnel and the ability to execute on the orders, and also knowing what worked and what didn't work, and Trump's rude awakening that a lot of those executive orders and a lot of those promises were actually just ignored by both his own federal executive branch and by Congress. And then the final key to this is J.D. Vance, who is very different from Mike Pence. Mike Pence was someone who, remember, if you think back to it, kind of normalized Donald Trump in the eyes of a lot of conservatives and made them feel better about it. Mike Pence kind of thought he was in that role to keep guardrails on. J.D. Vance thinks he's in that role to serve Donald Trump and to push a complete and total change of the GOP. So when people like Senator Tom Cotton's the latest, he's going after one of Donald Trump's nominees to the Pentagon. And they had meetings this week, so things might change on that front. Elbridge Colby. And he's saying, listen, I'm opposing this guy right now because I want to make sure the president gets people who support what the president wants. J.D. Vance didn't go right after his former colleague. He did go after some of his allies, though. And he attacked them online and said, this is wrong. This is insane. You don't understand. This is the man. Donald Trump wants him. So those games are no longer working because of a really engaged group of people from Vance to the middle management back to the ideas.
Well, J.D. Vance is making a huge difference. Elon Musk is also making a huge difference, right? He went out there over the weekend and was like, hey, sending an email. What'd you do last week, right? You're supposed to go through and reply to 5 different things that they did last week. But Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and FBI Director Kash Patel were going out through and saying, oh, hold on. We are not going to have our people go through. Please ignore that last email. So what's your take on all this chaos, right? Elon wants to get a job done. Trump is retweeting all this stuff. What's going on right now with this?
Elon Musk is doing some incredible work here, but Elon Musk is also new to governance completely, 100% a novice. So that's a superpower because he's willing to push things in a way that all those old hats will say, well, you can't do that. And he'll say, well, I just did. We just did do that. And the president backs it. And that's actually a way that's incredibly great at getting things done. One of the most frustrating parts about a lot of different veterans of Washington politics is those are the people who have the least inertia. They're kind of used to the way things are, and they no longer even see just how crooked and corrupt it is because for many of us, it's always been that way. That's the way it is. You fight where we can fight, and Elon Musk brings fresh eyes to that. But at the same time, and by the way, the Democrats claiming that it's a constitutional crisis to explain what you did in your work week is stupid. It's not going to work, and no one cares. It's not going to convince anyone. That's just a dumb take by Democrats. It's a dumb talking point. But at the same time, you saw this from Tulsi Gabbard, you saw this from Kash Patel, people who are working on criminal investigations, people who are working in intelligence, and not going to send 5 bullet points on a public email of the different things they did. They're involved in spycraft investigations. And also, when you've got people like Kash, who are very interested in doing their jobs, who are going to be very good at it, I think he's going to want to follow that process and not get tangled up in any kind of judge saying, well, this authority or that authority or this authority. He's going to check every box when he investigates, and then he's going to dismiss people based on where he wants to do that. So as you get these experienced personnel and director positions throughout the Trump administration, I think you'll generally see a slowing of some of what DOJ has been doing, because you have directors who want to continue that mission, but they don't feel the need to do it this week. They might work it out and do it by the books and avoid the lawsuits over the next 2.5 years.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this right now is I don't think it's planned myself, but Elon is playing this enormously important song and dance role where, he's with a chainsaw on national TV, freaking out a left that's absolutely melting down. I was next to a lady on the plane on the way out here who was, she was ready to leave America. She was going to renounce her citizenship. She's very concerned with fascism that's going to happen here. And this is a political class that's melting down. And Elon is taking a lot of the heat. He's jumping around and doing a lot of this stuff. I almost see this as, maybe I'm too sanguine about it, but I see this as a good thing. It's going to help as people like Russ Vought and Kash Patel go in there. They're going to do things like by the book, like you say. They know what they're doing and they have plans, and they're going to be rolling that out. I can't imagine that Elon and Trump are going to be upset at this. And the sense that we got walking around there last week was that everyone's sort of firing, in the same direction, but separately. And over time, as these leaders come into place, you would imagine the grooves will be set and it will become more organized. But I don't want to be too hopeful in front of the audience. But I genuinely feel like that this is actually true.
I know, you're so happy, you're so cheerful
So
these
weird.
days, Matt. Yes, you think there's going to be a future for the country, and I get it, because you, I think, like all of us, at some point had wondered, is this going to change? And you need that kind of outside chaotic force to actually push it. And another thing about this administration, which applies to DOJ and these secretaries, and applies to what I was talking about earlier, is that the courage is contagious. It absolutely is. People had their hair on fire during the first administration. One, they didn't really get Donald Trump, who is hysterical and tells jokes and posits completely insane ideas and different solutions that he does just to troll people and mess with them. It's one of his greatest attributes. People almost every single day in the White House in the first administration would light their hair on fire. Oh my gosh, this is abnormal. This is not allowed. This is not how we do things. And you'd have leakers running to the press trying to protect their reputation as opposed to the president who they work for every day. And you see it, the amount of people, most of them have faded away. Some of them are still on shows like The View. But the amount of people who just made a reputation of saying, I am the good Republican, not like this. You don't have that anymore. You realize that they're not going to hurt you. You realize that the other side is morally bankrupt in a lot of these different matters. Not everyone, but they've really abandoned the causes where they had moral currency for ones where they have none. And it's spreading. And you see the leaks. You see people working in concert. Some of them will be the chaotic jester type, and some of them will be the Black Knight or the executioner or the magistrate type. All these different kind of characters coming together on the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons to run this court. But yeah, it's contagious and it's running significantly more smoothly, and this is just another aspect of that.
Well, it was great seeing you last week, but it was also great seeing Rebecca Zelko as well. She's one of our rising stars. She's a reporter for Blaze. She has a big scoop coming out, a big high-profile interview. Can you give us a little preview of what we're going to see?
Sure. Rebecca went out there into the wilds of 55-degree Washington, D.C. The weather's so much better than it was last week.
Oh, of
and
course
she
it
had
is.
managed to snag snag an interview with the top negotiator for the GOP in these coming budget fights. And it's got some questions from him on everything from Ukraine to Doge and exactly what we're interested in learning.
And we're going to have Rebecca on in your place tomorrow. This was all done before the dentistry work, Chris, but I'm glad, that you're going to have some time off, that at least if you need to go there and just rest up, you can do that in D.C. when it's apparently much warmer and nicer out. So you're welcome. You're going to have a pretty good day there in the city.
It's a great day for facial surgery. Really nice.
Every day.
Open the window.
Every day. All right, Bedford, we'll catch you later.
See you Wednesday.
All right. Well, how will Trump broker a peace deal in Ukraine? We'll have your suggestions right after this.
I've been elected by the American people to restore common sense to Washington and indeed to the world. And I believe strongly that it's in the best interest of the United States, the best interest in Europe, the best interest of Ukraine, and indeed the best interest of Russia to stop the killing now and bring the world to peace. My administration is making a decisive break with the foreign policy failures of the past administration and, frankly, the past. I ran against a very foolish foreign policy establishment, and their recklessness has led to the death of many, many people. Under our administration, we're forging a new path that promotes peace around the world.
That's what we're trying to get. Donald Trump, peace around the world. Today is the 3-year anniversary of Ukraine. So I went on X today and asked, with this photo that Matthew and I were actually, that's my photo from this weekend in D.C. with the pro-Ukraine protest that we saw. So what deal should Trump make to end the war now? And here are some of the best responses. Jim Bicknell says the only deal is no more money and we get your resources. We deserve something for the billions of dollars that we sent you. Well, I'm in agreement, but I think Zelensky is like, hey, this wasn't a loan. You guys just sent the money over here, is what he's trying to say right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jim is spouting something called common sense, the same thing that Trump is talking about. This is the way that normal people and I think statesmen ought to think about this. No more money, and we get something in return. But what happens is, there are people who get something in return, right? Let's make no mistake. There's lots of people in America, particularly in the zip codes outside of Washington, D.C., who are making lots of money off of all of this. So, this is a real turning point for American foreign policy. And what happens here is going to light the way, right, for a new American foreign policy in the 21st century.
The people in those zip codes outside of D.C. are probably friends with the woman that you sat next to on your flight that was very upset that all of this funding for several projects was about to come to an end.
Well, yeah, I think that the line among the political class, people like that right now, is that, no, we don't need smaller government. We need bigger government because the GAO says so. And, we're understaffed and this is all inefficient because government. I could go on and on. They're melting down. They are melting down because this kind of common sense is not the way that they're used to playing the game.
We'll take the liberal tears. It's fine. Harrison Swigard says the U.S. must have all of Ukraine's rare earth minerals for the billions of dollars that we've lost over there. They must never be a member of NATO, and they must allow an in-depth investigation into the corruption within Ukraine. There are a lot of different points here. I would love to see an investigation into the corruption into Ukraine. That might take quite some time to unravel that. Once you start pulling that string, I don't know how far that one will go.
Well, the last time a president tried to look into the corruption, Congress tried to impeach him.
Correct.
Because he was trying to look into the corruption of, Hunter Biden. There is a ton here, and it would be great to use this as an example where you go after some egregious offenders and show the American people how this system works and how people in the United States make money off of foreign policy. It really is disgusting, and it has to end somehow. So, let's go. Let's do it.
John Kuntz rounds it out for us today. He says it's all been offered. Russia goes home, no NATO membership, the EU and UN can all have to chip in to help rebuild Ukraine. So yeah, they can help over in Europe too. The UN, go ahead, guys, jump in at any point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we need to end this conflict. I mean, the United States definitely needs to end this conflict, but it would be great if after that they sort of pass it off to Europe, so Europe grows up a little bit and becomes more mature when it comes to foreign policy, instead of being like the spoiled child protected by the United States. And then, having these crazy ideas about how foreign policy should work when they're not even defending themselves. So you want to kind of like it's like a spoiled kid. Like, you want to slowly give them more and more responsibilities. So that's what we need to do here. I agree with John.
What we get here with the media that has allowed this to happen for 3 years, where they just go on and say, oh, no, like things are fine. They aren't actually going to go through and report the truth and the facts of the matter, right? We used to always see, I remember growing up on the nightly news, you would see images and videos of wars that were going on around the world. Well, no, you don't need to see that here. But when you comes to find the importance of a free press and the media doing their jobs, I think that you go through and you look at it and you know that this is what it takes to get this country back.
Yeah, this is a really, really important point. It's one that a lot of people have been hitting on lately. I was thinking of this because I was talking to a young journalist today who's giving a talk or a presentation on the media and the First Amendment. And here's the thing to realize. First off, the media has never been objective. It never will be objective. The idea of objectivity that we have about the media was always basically a lie or kind of fiction. During the time of the founding, the media was far from objective. The media was paid for, in many cases, newspapers were paid for directly by political parties. It was so messy, you can't even believe it. You won't believe the stories. For instance, Sally Hemings, right, is a slave we know related to the Jeffersons, right? Thomas Jefferson or a relative, right, ended up impregnating a slave, right? We know this is true. This is still a story now that's taught in schools. You know how we know it's true? We know this story because Thomas Jefferson paid a man named Callender to attack his opponent, John Adams. And he attacked Adams brutally with a bunch of, fallacious lies and garbage in the press at the time. And most of it was not true at all. And then the Alien Sedition Acts pass, and this guy ends up going to prison. He's an enemy of Adams. This act is probably not in line with the First Amendment, and it's quickly overturned later. But he's thrown in jail, basically, by his political opposition. He gets out of jail and he goes to Jefferson and says, "I need you to help me pay the fine because I basically did time for you. I'm your propagandist." And Jefferson doesn't fully pay him back. The guy he's paying to basically, do dirty journalism. And that guy gets angry and he turns on Jefferson and he starts publishing rumors about Thomas Jefferson's personal life. And that's where the Sally Hemings story comes from. In other words, these were all men who did great things. They were also used to the dirtiness of politics and the dirtiness of journalism in ways you can't even imagine. And yet they supported the First Amendment and saw it as important. Why? Not because there's such a thing as an objective journalism, but because if government is not monopolizing information, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And in the midst of that messiness and muck, if everyone fights it out, they believed that the result would ultimately be good. They knew it would be messy. So take the good side of media at the founding. All of these guys were anons, to use the parlance of our times, talking about X or Twitter. They had anonymous accounts that they used all the time. They had so many alternative anonymous accounts, so many alts. We don't even know sometimes when some of the most famous founders were writing or not. Like, we don't know if Alexander Hamilton may have written this under this pseudonym, and so may have written this under this pseudonym. We don't even know who they are. They were all speaking behind the curtain to each other in the public prints, arguing over what should be done politically. Right after the Constitution passes, James Madison, a few years later, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton are arguing about what kind of powers the presidency should have during the Washington administration under anonymous accounts in the public prints. That's the sort of thing that ultimately is what you have to keep free, right? That argument back and forth, a serious argument, an open-ended argument that's not resolved. This is what's scary about Republican form of government and freedom. You don't know how it's going to go. But they had faith that if you kept it free, if you kept the monopoly of government the hell away from it, that ultimately the good guys would win. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what disappeared for a while in America. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why the notion of objectivity is so dangerous. You think with 3 networks and PBS back in the day that journalists was professional and objective. It never was. It never will be. But what will always be true is that the only way a Republican form of government can survive is if the government stays the hell away and allows people to argue amongst themselves.
Having just left the swamp ourselves, we were there to see it firsthand and to take shape. I will say that we left with actually some renewed sense of confidence that we might actually be able to turn this country around. Yeah. There are people in place that are building good things, and they do want to come through. And there are people in the administration now that want to shine a light on all of the darkness, all of the corruption that is happening. So yes, they need to do it with the media, but also the people that are going to be taking over in Washington, D.C. It is a completely different vibe than what we've seen there before. And you need to make sure that you can just kind of bottle this up and keep people on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, well, let's give the people a little bit more because they deserve it out there. I mean, there's 2 sides to the 2 days, like in 2 days that we were there.
3 days.
Well, I mean, there's 2 sides that I'm talking about right now.
All right, okay, for the analogy.
2 of the 3 days. One day we go to the executive branch. One day we go to the executive branch of the White House and EOB, and we're wandering around, and you just see like all these people, like many people that I know from Claremont, et cetera, just so many friends, so many good people, so much love. They're all marching in the same direction, and they're everywhere. And the Avengers are still assembling. It's not over yet, right? The Avengers are still assembling. They're not even fully staffed, okay? So the people in the government, like everywhere you go, there are incredible people around every corner, and they're all still assembling. You haven't even seen the beginning of the winning from the administration. No. And then the next day, we end up at a party with a bunch of people outside yelling, F you fascists, which I found thrilling. I mean, it's just straight into my veins. It was wonderful. The cops kept them away, and they were yelling and protesting. And inside were a lot of younger people, for the most part, representing this new coalition and celebrating in a cultural moment that was astounding. So it's both the culture, right? It's a new political class and the actual leadership in office.
Yeah, I was the only one who realized that we were by far the oldest people there. And he said, oh, I had no idea. I could not. I am one of these people here.
I still don't really believe it. I'm just saying it because you said it. And
it's okay.
It makes the story better.
It does. But there is so much that we accomplished there in D.C. Over the weekend. I am very excited to see where all of this goes. But I look at it and I think, okay, I know. My brain knows it's the swamp. Mm. Can we actually overcome this? That's the question at hand. That's the mandate.
Yep. That we're going to find out. But right now, it looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. I'm not going to lie.
The winning will continue. Everybody, thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.